Welcome to the Financial Freedom Secrets Show. This is your host, Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, helping business owners create financial freedom faster by mastering the language of money. Want to see how well you're tracking towards financial freedom? Complete our 40-point financial performance scorecard at wealthhealthcheck.com.au. That's wealthhealthcheck.com.au. The average score for most business owners is 18 out of 40. So complete the scorecard now and see how well you're tracking towards financial freedom. G'day guys, Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, and we're here for another episode of Financial Freedom Secrets Show. I'm here with a friend from New Zealand here, St. John Craner, who's going to be talking to us all about sales, but none of this icky kind of used car salesman crap. We're going to talk about congruent sales. We're going to talk about a value-based sales approach and how we can leverage sales in our business to be able to build more wealth, create more profit, and ultimately create financial freedom faster. So, mate, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
Good, Jackson. Great to be here, man.
Mate, it's my absolute pleasure to have you on the show. So, mate, tell us a little bit about you and your story, mate.
Yeah, did the whole marketing gig, agencies, worked for Young Rubicon, McCann Erickson. I can keep dropping names and work for big corporates and stuff like that. And we'll get to it. But yeah, kind of like I'm a reform marketer and still do a little bit of marketing. But generally, my jam these days is I train in a specific niche in agribusiness. And I train rural sales teams that are usually underperforming and rural sales managers, because usually managers have the biggest multiplication effect. But like a lot of principles we'll talk about will be applicable to any sector, particularly the kind of psychology side of things.
And mate, this is really interesting, right? Because obviously we're up in far north Queensland. We're surrounded by a lot of agribusiness. And you don't really associate agribusiness with sales, right? So how did you find yourself in this niche?
Yeah, good question. Basically came from a farm background anyway, and so got back to my roots, essentially, almost circular in a loop, because my dad was a farmer. He worked for Dalgety, which is a big outfit in the UK. And I kind of was a product of my environment. But what it was is I've really enjoyed people that work on the land or from the land. I think it's a very honest craft, an honest trade. And I've always I've worked for some really big corporates, and I don't know. I think I've got to this tender age at 48 at time of recording, hopefully. I like to deal with people that I like. And, we call it kind of like the beer test. Could I have a beer with them? And farmers are my kind of people. And anyone that's rurally related on the land. I live here in Hawke's Bay in New Zealand, which is very, very agricultural, or until recently when we had a cyclone sort of smash part of our landscape, or quite a lot of it, where our main road is still blocked. But yeah, surrounded by lots of orchard, fruit bowl, sheep and beef guys. And within that, obviously machinery, agri-tech, all those kind of things, accountants, advisors, farm consultants, all those things. So yeah, I kind of really just went back to my roots, really, Jackson. There's no real more complicated answer to that, but just always been deeply curious in human behavior, really. And then I kind of, applied that and put it together with sales, and then here we are.
Makes a lot of sense, mate. Look, from what I've understood and the interactions I've had, even since we've been up here in far north Queensland, farmers are salt of the earth kinds of people. They do hard, honest work, but it's a really hard business, right? And like any business, you can have the world's best product or produce, but how you sell it and how you market it is probably a big aspect of success. Would I be right in that assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. I think farmers particularly, excusing my bias, men and women are some of the most sales-resistant people. Now, the reason why they are, so it's a really good training ground for any salesperson, I think, again, excusing the bias, but because they're so sales-resistant, because they score very highly on agency or autonomy, all the videos you do of your wonderful place, you are mending fences, you are doing things. We call it the number 8 wire. I don't know what you call it in Aussie, but you're very resourceful. And you mainly do things for yourself because you wanted to be the boss of yourself. So you're very high on autonomy and agency. So when someone tries to sell you something or take control of that sale, then they're going to shut down. So, it's a really good breeding ground. It's really tough because farmers, they don't say much. When they do, you got to really, really listen, and you got to be really tuned in, and they're incredibly dismissive if you don't understand them and who they're about. I mean, I've been just south of Dubbo with a very large merino ram breeder. And it's, I was there for a couple of days, which is a real privilege. And I'm training them and sitting them, and we're talking marketing, we're talking sales. And I wouldn't have even been able to be there if I didn't understand his basic farm system. So you you have to earn that right. So I've answered in a very long way, but it's like, ultimately, you really have to understand your market and what makes them tick, and that whole thing that we've been talking in our business group around specificity, spitting cash. But I haven't even answered your question, Jackson. So just keep plying me, and I'll try and
this
add some value at some point.
Sense. Here's what's interesting here, and this is where all of the dots connect, is that farming is sometimes it's a very hard product to sell. It requires a lot of subject matter expertise. And for a lot of our clients, they are subject matter experts, and they do struggle with scaling sales teams, getting them up to KPI, being able to deliver what they do at mass. And I'm sure you encounter this all of the time, where there's potentially fresh salespeople who are coming into this environment, and it's kind of like a baptism by fire. So talk us a little bit through some of these problems that you solve when it comes to getting these sales teams cranking in this very competitive environment.
Yeah, 100%. Look, there's one thing that's really, really important that's been taught to me, is we often focus on the sales team, and that's great in terms of scalability, in terms of the listeners that are listening here. But the first thing is you actually need to focus on the manager or the sales coach, because they have the biggest impact. I always say you get the teams you tolerate. So it's really, really important that you focus on your managers or yourself first as a founder. So you become a sales coach. So we talk about systemizing things. We talk about the most trusted train. You know, everyone's got like this kind of allergic reaction, like we're going to do role play, and they think we're going somewhere else, and I'm not being rude. But like, it's not. It's like a rehearsal and a practice run, because, you know, military, police, doctors, surgeons, search and rescue, they all role play and simulate a real life experience. You know, like when we jump on a big plane to go overseas, that pilot has spent an awful amount of time in a flight simulator because he's not down an A380. And so what it is the most important thing you have to do, the first thing you have to do with your salespeople, is they must believe in your product. So you must believe in it, and we call it the buoyancy of belief. So ultimately, sales is a really, really rough, tough, hard-nosed, frontline thing. You're going to get a lot of rejections, a sea of rejection. And Dan Pink, in a beautiful book called To Sell is Human, he talks about the buoyancy of belief. Now, if you can embed and imbibe in your team their belief about your product, and maybe they would been a client of yours, which is usually where you get your best salespeople from, if you can build that belief in them, they have that buoyancy of belief where any rejection doesn't hurt them personally, because our biological brain is wired to belong, and this is why we hate rejection. This is why people are reluctant on call reluctance and selling. And the first thing I teach, Jackson, and finally we're getting some value, Jackson's going, finally St. John's getting some value here, is the first thing we teach them is to stop selling. Stop selling. So what we do is we talk about serve to sell. And we talk to them about the problem with sales is selling. So the thing is, when they get worse, they being your competitors, you have to get better, because your clients and your ideal clients have been burnt and bruised by a really shitty sales experience. So that's kind of the first thing we do, is like we get that salesperson to be comfortable with the concept of sales, but we put the sales context in a buying context, in a service-based context. So we serve before we sell, we give before we get. You know, I don't know about, you know, length of sales cycles for your coaches and your teams and your advisors and your consultants, but it's a real hang up and bang up that people got this connotation of sales. So that's the first thing we do, is say we stop selling. The first thing we do is we stop selling, because the worst way to sell is to sell.
Yes, this is my biggest bugbear when I started in sales, because I was very much taught the wrong way, and it just never sat well with me because it just felt icky. And then I realized, I'm like, oh, maybe I'm not cut out to be a salesperson. And then I tried to develop a very much value-based approach where we rely on that law of reciprocation. You do the right thing by people. They know a good idea when they see it. You make it easy for them to make a decision either way, and we do so without judgment. It's not a reflection on us as a salesperson. It's just potentially not right now or not the right fit. And it is what it is. So I think that makes a lot of sense. But I think there's also a balancing act here, right, of not over-serving. Because I've personally found when I was early in my career doing sales, is you can sometimes deliver so much value that the prospect or the person on the other side feels like they've achieved the outcome they were looking for, and they don't end up buying. Is that a problem that you also encounter in these sales?
Yeah, that's very pertinent point you're doing there. I can't remember it. Someone much more cleverer than me said recently, they said, When your level of care exceeds the client's level of care, that's when you stop caring.
Yeah.
And, over-servicing clients, if there's a lifetime value or they have a strategic fit because they're a name that you can leverage, and I have some of those. I have some strategic clients. They don't spend a lot of money with me, but they have a huge value to me because of the association. Then I will go the extra mile. But the reality is, where did you think that over-servicing came from, Jackson? I'm interested. I'm curious.
I think there's a lot of this comes down to mindset and values, and that congruency of values. And I feel that a lot of salespeople, I'm speaking from my own first-hand experience, feel the need to demonstrate that value so clients don't have to take a leap of faith, right?
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. The reason I asked that question, it leads to another one, is that sometimes we have people that do what we call show up and throw up. It's a verbal vomit, and they just tell you absolutely everything and give you absolutely everything. And what's happening is it's a very one-way conversation. So the first thing we do is we are our technical prowess or worse, ego, goes, and I'm talking to you, Jackson, and I know the problem, and you're buying this, and I know exactly you are what your problem. I want to jump in and just fix it for you straight away. The most important thing is we don't focus on the technical before we focus on the conversational. It's all about constructing a really safe conversation with that client. And so a lot of what we teach as well is around signaling buyer safety. So in the conversation, we will teach students how to make sure that they are not perceived and received as a yucky salesperson. And the first thing they do that is basically by focusing on having a conversation and being conversational instead of technical. Because what's happening is, I train a lot of seed guys or FERT guys or feed guys, and even your guys and girls, they can go into the technical because we're so keen and enthused that we've spotted the pattern. We just want to go, look, this is exactly what you do, and you do this, you do that, and you put your five buckets here and your profit first or whatever you're into, and the client's just gone. The client needs to know that they've been felt, heard, and understood, and you can only do that by asking questions because you are being judged by the questions you ask. The quality of your questions determines the quality of your answers and the quality of your conversation. If you listeners are having a long sales cycle, it's because the quality of your conversations aren't high enough, because they're not asking the right questions in the right way at the right time. So sorry, dramatic pause there, Jackson.
This makes a lot of sense because I feel a lot of salespeople, particularly professional salespeople who want to do sales for a living, because it's a phenomenal way to make a lot of money. They focus a lot of their time and effort on the sales tactics and not necessarily on understanding the product. And I feel that to ask really good questions, you have to have a really deep understanding of the product and how it solves these problems, and also the problems themselves. You can't have those conversations with sales tactics, can you?
No, you can't, because I think sales tactic is something that you do to someone, and a conversations you do with someone. So, human-centered selling, and this is why I'm a big fan of psychology, is understanding the main motivations of human beings and the laws of human nature. But to your point, the sales tactics aren't needed, and you don't need to do these puppy dog close and hardcore selling and always be closing, all this kind of American rubbish. Because if you use a process, the process protects. So you have a thing called a pre-call plan. So we have like 6 stages of pre-call plan, and we follow that process just like a surgeon does, just like a pilot does. The process will protect you. More importantly, the questions that you ask, and they're signaling your sincere intent to serve, you are already distinguishing and differentiating yourself as a sales professional, because you are signaling your interest and your curiosity in qualifying, not selling, qualifying whether you can help them or not. So a question I like to ask, because I spotted 2 words you're using a lot, using congruence a lot and you use problems a lot. So what I do is, one of my first questions I ask is, Jackson, do you mind me asking, what's the problem you think you're trying to solve here? That's the first question I will ask. And I let it land because I want to know what's motivating you, what's your desire, and where you're at right now in your own head. What's your buyer motive? And you're going to tell me how you're framing up your problem. Now, the problem you diagnose might be correct, but there's no point defining the wrong problem. We want to focus on the right problem. So I'm kind of qualifying and defining that problem with the customer, not to the customer, not selling that they've got a problem. They're telling me, like a doctor, we sell like a doctor. It's a consultative sale. But yet again, like a doctor, you have to have bedside manner, right? You have to have EQ. Like, you can't just go, oh, Jackson, look, I've got a torn calf. Look, St. John, just take those pills and off you go. Like, I'm not going to feel very good about that. I want to understand how you tore it. And is this the first time you tore it? And what activity you were doing? Was it left or was it right? And is this hereditary or is this genetic? And what kind of solution do you want here? Is this short term or medium term or long term? Or can we get away with it now? Or do we need to look in the future? So that curiosity in that conversation using questions, because curious people ask really good questions, right? That's the way that you start. So, selling ain't telling. We ask really, really good questions, and we're planned and prepared by asking those questions. If we have a good conversation, sales is all about conversations. The sale is not made in your presentation or your RFP or your template. It's made in the conversation. So you've got to make your conversations count. So you have to practice and you have to perfect those conversations and you have to role play, you have to rehearse, and it feels yucky. But the thing is, the more you do it, when it comes to the live deal, you're not going to crash the plane.
Makes so much sense, mate. And I think this probably fills a lot of business owners with anxiety, because I think this raises the stakes of why we need the right salespeople. And I know we've had this experience. Like, we've got a phenomenal salesperson, Michael. He's been with us for many years. I've known him since we're teenagers. He has great values, believes in the product, loves what we do, and does a phenomenal job. However, that hasn't always been our experience with our salespeople. And I know that for many of our clients, when they've tried to build sales teams, they don't always find the right person. So have you got some tips for people who are building sales teams of how to qualify the right individuals to fill these seats on the bus?
Yeah, good question. I think probably you know the answer as well as me. Your best salespeople usually come from someone that's bought your product, bought and believed in your product, because they've got that buoyancy belief. They've got it. Secondly, when I am interviewing salespeople, I want to see a few qualities. The first quality I look for is their ability to kick their own ass. So they've got to be self-motivated, intrinsically motivated. I look for conscientiousness. Like, do they say please? Do they say thank you? Do they follow up? You can set them. Another thing I like to do is I like to set them a live exercise. I like to listen to some of the sales calls that they've had, because, you're absolutely right, Jackson. I reckon the appointment of salespeople is probably one of your most important appointments as you begin to scale, and you've got to get the right people. So you have to have a very, very strong vetting process. Get them to sell to you. Like, ask them straight off the bat, why should I think about even working with you? Why us? Why are you sold on us? Sell yourself to me. See how they sell, because a lot of people think they can sell, but they can't, because they don't have the capabilities and the competencies. The key thing you've got to look for is you've got to go through a process of checking those competencies, and we're not talking about disc profiles and Myers-Briggs and everything else. Give them practical sales scenarios, live briefs, and ask them, just get them to sign the confidentiality agreement or the NDA, and then send it to them and say, right, this is a sales situation. How would you go about it? The other thing I do, never, ever have only one candidate. You must have three going for that, so you can get a benchmark on what the market's at. If you're fortunate, you're flooded with applicants and it's a tight labor market, and good salespeople are like rocking horse poo, as I like to say, very rare and very, very hard to obtain. So you're going to have to work really, really hard at your employment brand and your branding, your positioning. Your best people usually come from your flock or your crop, which is the people that have bought your product. So yeah, those are the few things that I'd be looking for.
It makes a lot of sense, mate. And we're seeing a big shift in the sales market. Obviously, globally, we're at this rates of really high employment. So not only is it always hard to find good salespeople, they're unicorns, now they're even harder to find because they're already highly desirable and demanding big bucks. And we've seen a big shift where there was potentially commission-only roles or like small retainers and big commissions, to a big shift to more of a corporate model with quite significant retainers and commission models on top. So, mate, in terms of your observations in your space, where have you seen compensation for salespeople change and evolve, say, over the last few years?
Yeah, good. And we're getting to the finances now. What I would say is it's going to depend on the individual. And if you segment a sales team, if you've got some top guns, boys or girls that are nailing it, they should be very commission hungry. They want no capped OTE. They want uncapped OTE, opportunity to earn. So don't ever limit them or ceiling them. If they are asking around whether they can negotiate for more commission than salary, I always see that as a good sign because they've got confidence and belief in themselves. If someone's asking you for a really high base and retainer, that signals to me that they don't believe in their own sales capability. The best thing I would do is I would ladder them, I would ramp them, I would give them a certain number of times, a certain number of milestones. If they get to this amount of income, then they get this salary. They get to this income, you can tier. So everything's tiered. So up to them if they want to accelerate their ramp time. And obviously we as business owners need to take responsibility for investing in them and seeing them succeed. We don't want to set them up to fail. We want to set them up to succeed. I would start them lower than they are, only because, not because I'm a penny pincher, but pay them what you think they're worth on paper and then get them to prove their value to them and make it very, very clear to them that you will scale their base and their commission very, very quickly if they perform. So it's all performance tiered. It's all aligned around performance, and be really, really clear what performance looks like. And then your compensation plans, don't have your compensation plans going for years and years and years. Depending on the lifetime value of your client that you acquire, you chop it off after 12 months because you don't want them to get lazy or familiar or complacent going, oh, I've kept that commission's just kicking because I got Jackson that really, really big client. And that client's there for 3 years, 4 years. After 12 months, you cut it and then you start again and the season starts. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, mate. And look, I think the other part here is the cash conversion cycle on what they're selling. And I'm sure you see this at different sectors of the agricultural market, right? I'm sure there's things that have very short cash conversion cycles and some that might be a once a year purchase. And if you get that timing wrong, they might be keen to buy, but it might take 12 months for them to come back and separate with the cash. So that obviously impacts somebody shifting from maybe an established sales role into a new sales role to get them up to on-ramp. How do you handle that kind of conversation of selling people on that on-ramp of getting up to KPI in a new role and kind of taking a bit of leap of faith on us as well?
Yeah, so what's happening is you're selling to them as much as they're selling to you. So there's a two-way process here. It's a two-way street. So they've got to have a belief in your product, and they've got to prove that, and they've got to sell themselves in. And then you've got to sell themselves that you've got this amazing track record, that you're not a business that's going to flake and fail, that you're going to be around for a long time, because, of course, they're thinking about career, they're thinking about reputation, social standing, significance, all the signalers when we're associated with being employed. On the conversion cycle, we need to be really, really clear about when that really busy time is. Maybe for you it might be all year long. For me, it might be someone's mating or someone's milking, or there's particular crops that are growing and being harvested or put in the ground at a certain time. So you have to be really, really clear when that time is and manage that expectation from the get-go. Like, this is when we make our money. This is like the season, the 4 months where we go like hell and high water. It's not uncommon for me, obviously, because farming is a biological cycle. Most of my businesses might make their money in 3 or 4 months out of the whole financial year. So they've got to be really, really tuned into that. The cash conversion thing is again, it's this point of a process protects, and you know this and your listeners know about nurturing that lead and continue to have a conversation and adding so much value that when they do come to think about buying from you, they're going to buy from Jackson and his team because you've added so much value in terms of nurturing. The buying pyramid is massive, and anyone doesn't know what the buying pyramid is. Chet Holmes, I think he advised Tony Robbins, a wonderful, wonderful diagram worth its weight in gold. If you imagine I'm drawing you a triangle, at the top of the triangle, if you were to drive up 300 driveways, let's say, I'm talking in farmer talk here, only 3%, 3 out of those 100 driveways be ready to buy now. The good news is 37% are thinking about changing or looking at what you have to sell, but need more information to make an accurate and informed decision. So you need to be nurturing those leads. So that this is where the service component of selling comes into, that we're really embellishing that lead, nurturing that lead, giving before getting, serving before selling. So when it comes to time, crunch time, that might be biologically, or there might be, say, end of tax year, might be really, really important for you guys. I'm seeing all the tax ads now on telly here in NZ. All the accountants are just screaming, tax and GST and everything else. But they're not on telly for 11 months of the year. They're just on because our financial year is 1 April, 31 May here in NZ. So, just be really clear on the expectations and realise that, selling is a process. And if we follow that process, it protects us. Salespeople like allergic to process. I don't know why. I mean, we have world-class surgeons that have checklists in the operating theatre. We have pilots that have a pre-flight checklist. Why salespeople don't follow checklists? It's a constant surprise to me.
It's interesting, mate. And to be fair, I consider myself a salesperson and a marketer because I'm very passionate about what I do. And in order to get the level of impact that I want, I need to be good at sales and marketing, because how else am I going to spread my message? And I think people like us, we're high dominant, high influencing, and we don't like to get bogged down in the detail. But sometimes it's the detail that gives us the consistency of outcome, and that's why so many salespeople, whether they be the business owners or part of the sales team, they're on this roller coaster, right? So we need to kind of lean a bit more into that process. I agree. I'm guilty of this myself, mate. So we've delivered so many golden nuggets here already, my friend. But if we had to summarize one last golden nugget for everyone to take away, what would that golden nugget be?
Sure, really appreciate that. Best thing is to get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I'm sure Jackson and his wonderful team will put my link in the LinkedIn profile in the show notes. You can go to I can't say my R's, ruralsalessuccess.com. We'll give that URL. Even if you're not in rural, you'll get all the things around psychology and questions and cheat sheets and resources. So yeah, that's kind of the best way, really. I have a podcast too. And, all that stuff's all on that page. So if people feel like they want to know more around psychology and how it's kind of a bit more of a sales superpower, then, feel free to reach out and grab what you want. I'm more than happy to share.
Mate, you're an absolute genius. This stuff's super valuable, and I think this is a great reminder for so many people, particularly in this market where we've got low sentiment, that you need to double down on the value, that's going to get you through these tough times, as opposed to trying to embed these sexy tactics that are typical. They're pretty cyclical, and these types of things navigate any economic time. So, mate, I appreciate you making the time, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Cheers, Jackson. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, mate.